All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, I want to thank you all so much for being here with us today. And this is for a discussion of the film La Guerre est finie, or The War is Over. I'm Mark Wallum. I'm the Executive Director of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives. And I'd like to begin by saying that this event is being recorded. So if you prefer not to be seen in a recording, just turn off your camera. It'll be up on our YouTube channel about a day after the event is concluded. ALBA's mission is to preserve the legacy of the heroic volunteers who fought fascism in Spain. If you are following contemporary events even casually, you are aware of the importance of not just honoring the historical fight against fascism, but the importance of fighting the rise of fascism today. Please join us in that fight. For those of you attending our events for the first time, be sure to check out our website for more information on our efforts. My colleague Dennis is putting a link to the website in the chat right now. And also be sure to sign up to receive our quarterly publication, The Volunteer. Be sure to sign up for that if you don't get that already. ALBA is pleased to offer our programs free of charge, but of course, this is only possible through the generosity of our donors. Please do consider making a donation at the links which Dennis is putting in the chat. And I do want to talk about a promotion that we're having right now. For a donation of $75 or more, you can have this very attractive mug with the ALBA logo, fighting fascism since 1936. We're very proud of that, and we know that you are too. And for a donation of $75 or more, we'll be happy to send you this mug. It's a very attractive mug. You can drink coffee and fight fascism at the same time. So we're very pleased to say that this film series is part of our Peter and Carol Anti-Fascist Education Fund, honoring our dear friend, the late, great Peter Carroll. And all ALBA programs are made possible by our generous donors, including the Puffin Foundation and Open Horizon. And now I'd like to introduce Gina Herman, who will lead us in the discussion of the film. Gina Herman is a member of the Executive Committee of ALBA. She is a professor of Spanish and Judaic Studies at the University of Oregon and has published extensively on leftist culture in Spain, anti-fascist resistance, and the communist experience in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. The Franco regime. She's also published on the Franco regime and World War II. Gina is also the editor of the only English language book of essays devoted to Jorge Semprún. So thank you again all for attending. And now, Gina, over to you.
Hi, good early evening to all of you. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, and I hope you're holding on wherever this meeting may find you. Thank you for joining, and thank you for taking the time to take a look at this film, a film that I studied closely some 15 years ago, and I'm very delighted to have had the opportunity to dig deep into it again when a publishing deadline wasn't hanging over my head. The more I watch this film, the more aware I become of how poignant it is for today in a time when we are contemplating forms of resistance. Resistance against authoritarianism, of creeping fascism, anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry, classism. So this is a very beautiful and unusual film in the work of Alain Resnais, the great French filmmaker, and he was introduced to Jorge Semprún, the Spanish Republican exile, member of the French resistance, survivor of the Buchenwald concentration camp, member of the anti-Franco resistance while he was in exile in France, and later Spain's Minister of Culture under the first democratic government. These men were introduced by the daughter of the great André Malraux, Florence Malraux, who was married to René. And René had read Semprun's first autobiographical work, the first piece that he wrote about the deportation experience in Nazi concentration camps. They had a meeting of the minds, and they decided that together they wanted to make what René insisted should be not a film necessarily about Spain, but a film about politics. So, this film, I want to talk not just about its content, but also about its very unusual form, very beautiful and unusual cinematography, soundtrack, and aspects of its montage. As we think about content and form and how they are mutually constitutive, I want to pay attention to the question of time and also the sort of the cartography of the film. The film's title echoes, and I think ironically, Franco's famous declaration, "La guerra ha terminado," the war is over. The irony is, of course, that the war marches on for these resistance fighters, these clandestine movements, both within the Spanish borders and across into Spain, and of course, orders from coming directly from the Soviet Union with the Spanish communist leadership in exile. So as we attend to content and form, there are some questions that I would like you to think about, and we're going to be looking at a few specific clips. These questions echo the questions that I posed at the end of the introductory video, but with some slight differences as I've been thinking more about the cinematography of the film. The first is, what are the two models of resistance that are presented in the film? What are the two ideologies and strategies? How are they associated with youth and age, generations, nations, and a certain kind of female embodiment? The second question is a new one that I did not pose yet at the end of my presentation, and that is, where is Spain visually, emotionally, politically, conceptually, and graphically? So on the screen in this film, where do we see Spain, or how is Spain imagined? Because of course René could not film in Spain. And finally, the question about the love interests, the affair, perhaps the one night encounter between the young female French revolutionary whose father's passport is being employed by Diego, our main character, to be able to pass across the border, and then his live-in partner, lover, Marianne. How are these women associated, perhaps, let's say, with the strategies of the anti-Franco resistance, beyond just their general, their generational relationship to the two different resistances being portrayed in this film and that are in conflict in this film? So this film is concerned with the state of revolutionary politics. And here we have a spatial and temporal unity that's central to the action. We have a sympathetic, finely drawn protagonist. Yves Montagn's acting has been highly praised in this film. And they sort of lend the film an air of elegant simplicity, something that's almost akin to classicism. So this character, Carlos, Domingo, or Diego, he's really imbued with a world-weary grace and elegance. He's a professional revolutionary in exile, and 30 years after the Spanish Civil War, he and a group of comrades who are moving, again, between France and Spain, continue to try and chip away, without success, at Spain's fascist government, the Franco regime. They transport leaflets, and sort of the main event that's the source of debate and division is a general strike. A general strike that the Spanish leadership believes will motivate students, labor unions, intellectuals, members of the cinema industry to go out on a strike against the regime. And the hope is, of course, that this will then spread and that Franco is, so fragile that he will be toppled. We find out otherwise. The spectator is frequently, us, the audience, we're presented with Diego's optical point of view, and his mental state is periodically described in something that's very unique to Semprún's writing, and that is he addresses himself in tu, in the you form, and in the original production, it is Jorge Semprún's own voice that is recorded for the voiceover. The film has been celebrated for these highly subjective sequences, frequently called flash forwards, but they're really, I would say, more sort of short elliptical flashes of anxiety that project possible outcomes to risky behavior. So Diego has been charged with trying to rescue Juan, a comrade who is at risk of falling into the fascist hands in Spain, and he is seen imagining what might happen to his comrade, and there's an element of there by the grace of God go I, right? That what might happen to the comrade might also happen to him. There's a circular structure to the film wherein the Juan character in Spain is at risk of falling, of being captured. So the film begins with this episode called, basically to save Juan, and the film ends with Diego himself needing rescue or intervention by his comrades. And in fact, we see, and this is something that I'm hoping you'll discuss in your breakout, it's the women who are sent to try and intercept him. And what does that tell us about sort of the gender politics of the resistance? What's happening in this film in relation to women's roles in the resistance? It's complex. I'd also like to point out that these one of the innovations of this film are these brief shots, these push-ins or match cuts, these sequences that we might think of as capturing sort of the unique syntax of imminence, right? What's about to happen, and this sense of dread or anxiety, I think, communicates to the audience both a dynamic between the sense that the resistance has failed and the hope that the resistance might succeed. I want to move now to a couple of clips. I think Dennis has prepped these for us. And Dennis is going to show us some clips, and then I'll make some small comments. You also might want to also make some notes for yourselves about elements of the clips you might want to discuss in your breakout groups.
Je suis ton ami, Diego. Oh, les choses que j'ai à dire sur l'Espagne ne plairaient à personne. Moi-même, je ne suis pas sûr qu'elle me plaise. La malheureuse Espagne, l'Espagne héroïque, l'Espagne au cœur gêné par-dessus la tête. L'Espagne est devenue la bonne conscience lyrique de toute la gauche. Un mythe pour anciens combattants. En attendant, 14 millions de touristes vont passer leurs vacances en Espagne. L'Espagne n'est plus qu'un rêve de touristes ou la légende de la guerre civile. Tout ça mélangé au théâtre de Lorca. Et j'en ai assez du théâtre de Lorca. Les femmes stériles et les drames ruraux, ça suffit comme ça. Et la légende aussi, ça suffit comme ça. Je n'ai pas été à Verdun, moi. Je n'ai pas été non plus à Teruel, ni sur le fond de l'Èbre. Et ceux qui font des choses en Espagne aujourd'hui, des choses vraiment importantes, n'y ont pas été non plus. Ils ont 20 ans et ce n'est pas notre passé qui les fait bouger, mais leur avenir. L'Espagne n'est plus le rêve de 36, mais la réalité de 65, même si elle semble déconcertante. 30 ans se sont passés, les anciens combattants m'emmerdent. Excusez-moi, c'est peut-être pas très clair.
All right. So here we see Diego, who moves sort of between two class spaces. This is one of the interesting ways in which Semprún has projected his own experience into the film. He lives both in the real Jorge Semprún and the, yeah, Dennis, I guess folks are asking that the sound be a little higher for the next clip. He lives in a very bourgeois apartment. He's very elegant in the way he dresses with his lover slash partner, and he moves in his communications and organization with other Spanish Republicans in exile into peripheral, more working class, grittier neighborhoods in the outskirts. So here he is in the apartment he shares with his partner, expressing this frustration about a mythical Spain, the Spain of the Civil War. He was too young to have fought himself, and how Spain has moved on. Spain is a very important country in the anti-Soviet foreign policy of the United States. Spain has a burgeoning tourist economy. Spain has marched on, and the old school, the old left, the old combatants are stuck in the past. He's disillusioned, and yet one of the sort of thematic thrusts of the film is various kinds of love, sensual love, long-term romantic love, but also this abiding commitment to one's comrades, connection and mutual support in the cause. And of all of the loves that Diego feels, despite his increasing disillusionment with the current resistance, clandestine policies of the anti-Franco movement, his commitment to his colleagues, his determination to save them, to reach for a moment in which Spaniards might be able to go home, overrides or stands above in his hierarchy of loves, I think, above all others. Let's take a look now. I'll say one other thing, and that this monologue here is very quite famous in the Oeuvre of Semprún. He himself expresses this in his autobiography, one of his autobiographical texts, I should say, the autobiography of Federico Sanchez, which is his nom de guerre in Spain. So this is a sentiment that Semprún has expressed repeatedly, and here he puts it into the mouth of his sort of alter ego character Yves Montand. Let's look at the next clip, please.
Ivry, Porte de Lilas, 6 routes, 4 chemins, Aubervilliers, La Poterne de Peuplier, Victor Hugo, Jaurès, Paul Vaillant Couturier. Tu connais cette banlieue.
Can you stop right there?
Tu arrives de...
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this idea of where is Spain in this film. This is just a brilliant decision on with mise en scène with René. So what he has done is he locates the characters in a very concrete present, and it's very easy to miss this. So what you'll see here is in this moment, we see Yves Montand, the Diego character, going to visit comrades in these, as I said, grittier suburbs. These are the suburbs of Paris that are famous for their Spanish Republican citizen residents. And here we see the 8th of January, 1965. We're very clearly rooted in a moment in which there are demonstrations, liberty for Spain. And in the previous shot, which is very easy to miss, there is a very concrete historical reference to a resistance fighter, Spanish resistance fighter named Justo Lopez. Justo Lopez was captured, imprisoned, and eventually died in Franco's prisons. So here we have the images of these neighborhoods where the political action is focused on anti-Franco resistance. We have a concrete reference to Justo Lopez, who indeed ended up making the ultimate sacrifice for the resistance. It concretizes the risk that these characters are taking in doing this work, that they could very well end up imprisoned, tortured, and assassinated or murdered or executed in Franco's prisons. The other piece of this moment that's fascinating is it's filmed on a street called Celestino Alfonso that really exists in Paris, and which is named for a Spanish member of the French resistance who was captured and murdered by the Nazis. So there's a multiple layering, I would say, of Spain through this kind of cartography. Where are we in Paris? How are the streets, the pamphlets, the political work that's visualized here telling us about the current moment in Spain? And the voiceover here is, okay, you can keep playing, Dennis, please, just a little bit.
Ton pays, tu retrouves ce paysage de l'exil, à chacun de tes retours.
Okay, we can pause. So this idea of the Parisian neighborhood being a projection of Spain, in that it is a Spanish Republican neighborhood in this landscape of exile. So where is Spain? Spain is on the wall. Spain is in the newsletters. Spain is in the memory of Diego. But Spain is evasive. Spain is forbidden. Spain is dangerous. All right, let's take a look at the next clip.
On dirait que tu t'attends, Diego. Que tu es dans le brouillard. Que tu ne sais plus où tu vas.
Je sais où je vais à Barcelone. Je suppose que je devrais accompagner Juan à Madrid. Ensuite, je reviens ici. Il faut que je prenne du repos, qu'on discute avec moi. Je comprends, en Espagne, je vois les choses de trop près. La réalité m'aveugle. Il faut que je retrouve une vision d'ensemble, même si elle est irréelle.
Je ne comprends plus rien.
Oh, c'est très simple. Les copains vivent dans la certitude qu'un jour tout va éclater et que ce jour-là est proche. Je sais bien, personne ne peut se faire l'idée de mourir en exil. Mais ce n'est pas vrai. C'est encore une très longue marche qui nous attend.
Non, ce n'est pas possible. C'est vrai qu'il faut que ça éclate.
Tiens. Les diverses forces de l'opposition du Pays Basque ont décidé d'un commun accord de déclarer la grève générale à partir du 30 avril, 8 h du matin. Les étudiants y participeront aussi. La grève durera une semaine et si la répression, sa durée sera illimitée. Ça ne veut rien dire. C'est une espèce de langage magique, comme si on promenait des idoles pour faire tomber la pluie.
Mais non, J'espère qu'elle éclatera vraiment, cette grève générale.
Oh, il y aura des mouvements isolés ici ou là minoritaires, rien dans l'ensemble. C'est une action irréelle.
J'espère que tu te trompes. Elle éclatera, cette grève générale. Ce n'est pas ça que vous cherchez depuis des années. Ce n'est pas pour ça qu'ils sont morts, qu'ils sont en prison, tes copains. J'espère que tu te trompes. J'espère que tu es vraiment aveugle. Il faut que ça change. Que tu puisses rentrer en Espagne. Que je t'accompagne. Qu'on vive enfin.
Oh, ça ne sert à rien de pleurer ni de crier. La réalité ne change pas pour ça.
On rentre?
So here too, we see another sort of graphic, real world document, real world Basque Communist Party illegal newsletter that is announcing the general strike. And once again, we see this sort of sense of defeat, loss of belief in the strategy on the part of Diego, who nonetheless knows that his comrades are working, are at risk, and even though he is no longer a proponent of the current Communist Party dictated strategy around this general strike, which was a terrible failure, he must go. He must continue to go. He's driven to go home. And then, of course, we see later in the film how he responds to an alternative view, a more violent view, an armed resistance, a Marxist-Leninist youth-driven resistance that involves attacking tourists. So let's look at the next clip, please.
Moi aussi.
Dis-moi, qu'est-ce qui vous a amené à vous occuper de l'Espagne?
Bah et toi?
Ah, c'est mon pays, non?
Alors on n'a pas le droit de s'occuper de ton pays, Domingo. Chacun pour soi dans son coin. Tu voudrais qu'on se limite aux questions de l'UNEF, à nos petits problèmes étudiants et au drame des artichauts bretons? Je croyais que nous étions internationalistes.
L'internationalisme, c'est d'abord de faire la révolution chez soi.
Mon père vous prête son passeport, moi je porte des valises.
Justement, allons parler de cette valise.
Tiens, le passeport de ton père. C'est à quel étage?
Pourquoi tu ne viens pas avec moi?
Non, tu vas entrer d'abord toute seule et ensuite je te suivrai.
Tu n'as pas confiance?
Écoute, mes entrées, mes sorties, c'est moi qui en décide.
Avoir ta tête, on dirait que tu n'aimes pas les cimetières. Pourtant, ça dégage la vue. Ça fait entrer du soleil dans votre vie.
Vous représentez quoi exactement?
Comment?
Oui, enfin, vous collectionnez pas le plastique pour vous amuser, je suppose. Vous êtes un groupe, une organisation, vous avez un programme?
Nous sommes le groupe léniniste d'Action révolutionnaire.
Tout le monde est léniniste aujourd'hui.
Écoutez, on va pas s'embourber dans une discussion théorique. Nadine vous a confié une valise qui nous appartient. Que comptez-vous en faire?
J'aurais dû la jeter dans la Seine. Mais je suis vraiment curieux de savoir quelle tactique vous préconisez en Espagne. Je tiens à vous dire que je suis ici à titre purement personnel.
Allons, expliquez-lui.
Depuis 25 ans, l'Espagne se trouve dans une situation pré-révolutionnaire latente. Résumons-nous. Le tourisme constitue l'une des principales sources monétaires du régime. D'un autre côté, des millions de personnes s'habituent à considérer l'Espagne comme un pays normal. Ils associent l'Espagne à leurs souvenirs de vacances forcément agréables. C'est un facteur extrêmement dangereux de mystification politique, de démobilisation de l'action antifasciste européenne. C'est pourquoi il faut frapper le tourisme étranger en Espagne, créer un climat qui le rende impossible.
Pourquoi pas arrêter le soleil aussi?
Double résultat. Nous tarissons une source de devises et nous réveillons la conscience prolétarienne.
Parce qu'elle dort?
Non, excuse-moi, je ne voulais pas dire ça. Je dis qu'il existe en Espagne une situation révolutionnaire, objectivement. Mais il n'y a pas de politique révolutionnaire, pas de front révolutionnaire. Lénine a dit...
Lénine n'est pas un moulin à prière.
Mais votre voie pacifique, c'est du révisionnisme. Objectivement, vous vous mettez à la remorque de la bourgeoisie espagnole.
Objectivement.
Objectivement, c'est ça.
Et c'est pour cette raison que depuis 25 ans, on nous poursuit, nous emprisonne, nous défenestre, nous fusille, que toutes les peines les plus lourdes sont pour nous. Parce que nous sommes objectivement au service de la bourgeoisie.
Il a dit à la remorque, pas au service. Il a employé un concept politique que vous transformez en jugement moral.
C'est vrai, vous avez raison.
Nous ne mettons en cause ni la capacité ni l'héroïsme de vos militants. Nous mettons en cause une ligne politique.
Par exemple?
Par exemple, vous avez de nouveau lancé le mot d'ordre de grève générale pour le 30 avril. Et de nouveau, vous courez à l'échec.
Vous êtes bien catégorique.
Je m'en remets à l'expérience. Depuis 1959, toutes les grèves générales décidées ainsi ont été des échecs.
Depuis 59, ça fait quoi? 6 ans. La validité de mots d'ordre stratégiques ne se juge pas sur une période de temps aussi courte. Vous êtes bien impatient pour des gens qui veulent faire la révolution.
Et si on parlait plutôt de cette valise?
Justement, parlons-en. Avec cette connerie, vous avez failli me flanquer dans les pattes de la police.
Et si c'était le contraire?
Qui a pu attirer la police chez Nadine? Toi. C'est-à-dire la personne qui s'est servie du passeport de René Salange.
La filature a commencé chez Nadine, à cause de vous, de cet incident à la frontière. C'est la seule hypothèse vraisemblable.
La question qui se pose, c'est de savoir depuis combien de temps tu es suivi. La police espagnole a dû te signaler. Nous, en tout cas, on ne peut pas être brûlés.
Nous n'avons rien fait.
Oui, en tout cas, tous les groupes qui ont voulu jouer au terrorisme, ils ont été grillés en 4e vitesse. Et puis, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que j'en foute, moi, de votre plastique? Que je le bouffe? Tenez, c'est la consigne de la gare de Lyon et faites-vous sauter avec.
Okay, we can stop there. So there are a number of really interesting things to notice about this scene. Sort of the juxtaposition of the older, wiser militant's face and the young, fresh faces of the French revolutionaries. The debate over a more pacific approach and a more violent approach, but also an element of the plot, and that is Diego is screwing up. We see him make a number of mistakes. He goes to the wrong apartment. There's some questions about whether or not he's at the right address. And here he's so angry and he runs out because he realizes that he's been tailed and that now he's in trouble. And he wants nothing to do with the beautiful Geneviève Bujold. He has to go try and correct or at least intercept his colleagues who are in trouble. So let's look at one. Dennis, we have how many more?
One more.
One more. Okay, great.
Il faut prévenir tes amis. Les amis de Domingo. Le passeport, ils sont venus pour le passeport. Oui, c'est ça, je viens tout de suite.
Vous avez de la chance, madame. Une place qui vient juste d'être annulée. Pas de bagages?
Non.
Embarquement immédiat, premier étage. Bon voyage, madame.
Merci.
Alors, ça y est,
J'ai mon billet, ça y est.
tout est clair. Vous vous souvenez bien.
Je me souviens très bien.
L'adresse de la maison et ce qu'il faut dire.
Et 45 rue Rebord, 3e étage à droite. Je demande à parler à Teresa et je lui dis que le soleil se lève sur Benidorm.
Et qu'il n'aille pas à Madrid. Et qu'ils reviennent tous les deux, n'est-ce pas? Juan et lui. Et par des routes différentes.
C'est ça, qu'il revienne.
Bien. Je ne comprends pas pourquoi Carlos ne nous a pas parlé de cet incident l'autre jour à la frontière. Enfin, on verra bien. Mais ça va marcher. Vous avez juste le temps maintenant. Mais ça va marcher. Buon viaje.
Merci.
The music is the soundtrack is fantastic. So there's a lot to note in this closing sequence of the film. The two women who are determined to intercept Diego before he potentially falls into a trap, motivated both by a political commitment, both of these women, as well as for the emotional connection that they have to him. The ending has been interpreted in many ways. Some critics talk about how the end is really a love story, that the domestic love triumphs in the end. We see this beautiful partner of Diego rushing to save him, to be able to fulfill her dream, to do whatever is necessary to be by his side, perhaps giving up his identity and going back to Spain. We might also contemplate how women are asserting a role in the resistance, moving to action, in order to prevent comrades and lovers from falling into the Francoist police hands. I put an idea into the chat, and that is I said, idea to Mull: the uncertainty of the political situation is rendered indirectly through spectatorial uncertainty. This is an open ending. Will Diego's partner arrive on time? Will her coded message be received in Barcelona, specifically on the Calle Aribau? Another very, very interesting way of pulling Spain's concretely, its cartography into the film. Will she miss him? Will he fall? Will they be together? What will be the fate of these characters, and what will be the fate of the resistance? Of course, this film is made exactly 10 years before the death of Franco. So there was still some road to travel in the anti-Franco resistance. So I'd like you to keep those clips that we just watched in mind as we divide our audience into groups for discussion. And I'm going to hand it over to Dennis so that he can organize us accordingly. And I look forward to continuing the conversation in a little bit.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hi, everybody. I'm anxious to hear about your conversations.
Okay, great. I think we can begin with group one's answers then, which Phil Bernardo, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but you can present what your group talked about. Group one.
Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Okay, so we covered, believe it or not, according to my notes, 6 topics. I think in the future we might allow more time for the small group discussions. Let me just say as an overview, we had different reactions from your reactions, Professor Herman. For example, we thought that the music, some of us thought the music was too dreamy, and the beautiful cinematography, it wasn't gritty enough. It wasn't like Costa Gravas's Z, for example. And so it was easy to miss the political power, we thought, some of us. On the women, we had a long discussion about the role of the women. We thought they were rather subordinate. He was a cad, he uses the women. At the end, you saw Marianne being empowered as a activist, I saw her and others as a messenger. She was taking a message from one powerful man to another powerful man. A number of people commented that the sex scenes were great because they emphasized female pleasure. And even though they were very abstracted. Finally, a number of us pointed out that the beginning was very confusing. One person said they had to watch the film 3 times. My own reaction was in the first 10 minutes, like 20 different names were thrown out to us. And we had no idea who they were or what their relationship was. I don't want to go over time. We had 1 or 2 other comments. I don't know. Dennis, tell me if I should stop.
That was perfect. Thank you, Phil.
Okay. I hope
then...
everyone feels I was reflective of our conversation.
Good. Gina, anything to add to that before I go to group 2?
You know, I think those comments are valid. You know, the critical response to the film over the years has indeed touched on the very differences that you have highlighted that came up in your discussion. Is the soundtrack dreary? Is it jarring? Is it too dreamy? Is it irritating? How can one follow the political plot? I think that you're right. This is not a Costa Gavras film. This is an Alain Resnais film. And one needs, I think, to be quite initiated into the history of Spain and the resistance in order to follow what's happening. The question of the women is really fascinating. On the one hand, we have the young Nana, whose father is a member of the resistance and who counters the Diego or Domingo, as she knows him, character by saying, "Hey, you know, I carry suitcases. I'm actually doing resistance work." That's to be contrasted, and the kind of resistance work that she describes herself doing is not so different from the kind of resistance work that Spanish and French women did in the anti-fascist resistance in France. The carrying of materials, the carrying of suitcases, hiding things and hiding information in arms and strollers, backpacks. What's the power of a woman in a non-egalitarian period of history, and her ability to not draw attention to the clandestine militant revolutionary work that she might be doing. And indeed, the lover is passing on a message from one powerful man to another. Semprún was no feminist, and yet the film highlights female pleasure. The film shows the young daughter of the resistor in a position of action. So I think your group is right to point out these contradictions, this complexity. This is the mid-60s. That kind of schizophrenia, I think, is inherent in the thinking of these male creators. Someone's putting something interesting in the chat. Was the male here also not just carrying messages? We do not see him act. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't see him. We see him sort of running about in the planning, the decision about the planning of the action. It's about the planning of the action. the reticular, detailed, frankly, in many ways quite boring work of resistance. This is not about, guys, shooting up banks or planting bombs or blowing up rail lines. This is about how are we going to motivate young university students to rise up. It's paperwork. It's the delivery of messages. It's not a spy thriller. It's not Costa Gavras. That was a very interesting to read about the different kind of screenplays that Semprún wrote. His screenplays for Costa Gavras versus this work he did with Finie, and later with Losi. Okay, yeah, but thank you for that.
Oh, great, thank you, Phil. Okay, we'll go to group 2, which is our friend Richard Vermack. Richard, tell us what's up.
Hi, Richard.
Should we unmute?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we were all very moved by it. We had sort of the opposite reaction from what the person just described before, not to discard anything that he said wasn't true. But we all thought, I mean, I think we were totally moved by it. We all loved what you did, Gina. I mean, we've all seen, I think most of the people had seen the film many times, and it felt it added a lot to it, your analysis and stuff. I do have to say one thing that I have a little trouble with analyzing a film like that in terms of the sexual stuff from this perspective of today, because this was a very realistic film. I thought about what was going on there, and that was really almost I mean, the women's movement was going on, but it was just starting to go. It was not at that level, and just to talk about it. But anyway, we were all very moved by it. One of the things that came out, I think, at the end was sort of that we miss in terms of today's movement, the lack of a real movement that has a real structure in terms of an underground structure that could take care of people, that could whisk people away, that could protect them. The Democrat, and that was something I really sort of think find sort of scary, that we like something like that. The whole thing with the Communist Party, old left and the new left, and these kids, and how it sort of foreshadowed what would later happen. There would be a lot of violence and terror and terrorist groups, like for better or for worse at different levels. And I like the dreamy quality of it, but I also like Costa Gavras, a very different thing. But anyway, so we talked a lot about our sadness that there's not more of a political movement today, especially like what the communists did in terms of being very good organizers, to the degree that, I mean, there was certain problems. So anyway, but we have to say, we thought you really added a lot to the analysis of it there, and the depth of it. And I think that was pretty much, we sort of talked about what was going on today and the lack of any sort of party or anything, but in terms of the electoral thing, but missing the communist organization, at least an underground organization that could take care of people. But we all thought it was very realistic and really moved. It was almost, I loved your analysis, because when I watch it's hard to say anything just because I'm so moved and taken in by it.
What did your groups have anything to say about what kind of lessons or inspiration or cautionary tales the film might provide to a nascent resistance in the United States?
Well, I think we talked about the fact that it wasn't clear at this time. The Democratic Party just, I don't think anyone had any faith that it was going to go anywhere. But people didn't talk about this. But back then, it was really the movement that pushed the Democratic Party, and the need to develop a movement. This thing between violence and the nature and terrorism. I mean, because they were talking about terrorism, bombing something and killing people. It sounded like, versus, so symbolic stuff, and that later. Then what happened with later movements too is all very confusing. I mean, I'm just jumping ahead, but so the answer is actually, we didn't really know where to go. I mean, we talked about it a lot, but this is still happening. We're in real time of that movement, and it's so different. And if you look at the 30s versus what was happening in the 60s versus then the 80s versus now, they're all very different things. But there's a lot of romanticism to think back, or nostalgia thinking back about them. And I think it was a very nostalgic film, although it wasn't made at a nostalgic time, but to the same degree.
Someone mentioned in the chat that this film spoke to her and her people. She says, this is B. Lewis, I recall seeing this as a teenager, and its message being very connected for the American left with the US war in Vietnam and the growing anti-war movement. I think this film feels nostalgic for a time at which a certain approach to resistance work was appropriate in the 40s and 50s and now has lost its relevancy. So I'm interested in understanding what kind of impact this film might have made to the American left and those involved in the anti-war movement in the 60s in the United States. I mean, is the film hopeful or is it depressing?
Very, very good. Thank you, Richard. Very good jumping off point on a conversation. We're going to do group 3. Keep these group 3 through 4, 3 through 5. Keep these questions in mind. Hillary Gardner, thank you for volunteering to talk about your group. You should be able to do so now.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Just to echo what everyone has said, thank you so much for your amazing resources on the film. We started on the political question. We started sharing. Members were sharing, their own family histories in terms of, if they had parents, fathers who fought in the war, and whether their politics stayed consistent, or, for example, fought in Spain, fought in World War II, and then wanted nothing to do with politics, or stayed as sort of intellectual. So that was very interesting. We were talking about whether in families, political discussions were allowed and how important disagreements, expressing differences, accepting another's point of view, and the complexity of all the politics and strategy and the scenes in the film where those discussions take place, how interesting those scenes were. We did also talk a lot about the women and the timeline. We talked about whether or not the women were clueless or weak, and their desperation to bear children. And how did that fit into the timeline of feminism, but also the timeline of, so many children being lost in World War II, children being disappeared under Franco, and zero population growth. So the importance of bringing children back. And I think one member asked, who is the boy Patrick that he says goodnight to? I guess for me, I just wanted to say, thinking about the film on a timeline, it's 1960. I mean, there will still be executions by Franco up through 1974. And yet, I think as of 1945, people expected Franco to fall and the US to come in and get rid of the dictatorship. So it's interesting, this idea of how long they're in the resistance for. And I think too, for me, it's interesting to see Spain sort of portrayed as the place where the war is. Now we tend to allow war being somewhere else and tragedy. So this idea of crossing the border and going to help secretly is really interesting. I feel like it's something we don't do in the US as far as resistance. And then just one more thing I wanted to say, you asked about where Spain was featured in the film, and I really there's a line in the beginning I really like where they're in the car and he says, his friend driving says, no one hearing you talk would take you for a Spaniard. And then Diego responds, even I forget sometimes. So this idea that your identity is in your accent or in your language or in your name. And, that's really been challenged. And I just want to say, I translate Catalan. So of course that's a huge issue. And I was fascinated to see the Catalan theater director, Josep Maria Flotats, in the credits, but with his Jose Maria. instead of Giuseppe Maria. Like I had never known that he went by Jose Maria. So just this idea that language or accent or name can carry identity or memory.
Thanks for that. That's great. So rich, so many things to follow up on. I'll say that this is a highly autobiographical film, and that Semprún, never shies away from ringing his own bell or tooting his own horn. He indeed was very determined not to be made fun of as a young, as a teenager for his Spanish accent. And so he was absolutely determined that he would speak perfect French. So that's a little nod to his own cloaking himself so successfully in a French identity. And of course, in France, he's known as Georges Semprún. The other autobiographical piece that's interesting is the love, and his partner in the film is based on his event, his wife, and his wife Colette had a child from another marriage, and I think that child is sort of projected through the child. Patrick Semprún's relationship with his own biological son came to a very tragic end. They basically stopped speaking, and then his son predeceased him. His father died before the son died before Semprún did. So there's that piece. There's this child that he ends up helping to raise in his real life with Colette Loup. You also mentioned now I'm blanking on what I was going to say. The importance of debate within families about different generational approaches to authoritarianism or of politics. And there does seem to be sort of like a family dynamic, right? In the disagreements between the older militant and the younger fighters. Indeed. He's sort of like a fatherly figure coming to speak some sense to them, and they're quite in many ways dismissive of him. And in the end, when they can't see eye to the eye, they're just like, okay, old man, let's just get back to the explosives. And he's basically, like, screw you, I gotta go, because he realizes that they've now told him that he's been followed. And again, his heroism and his skill is very subtly critiqued throughout the film, in that he's making mistakes. And is it a function of his age? Is it a function of his weariness? This is not often explored in the film, but he is indeed making mistakes. Okay, the question is how accurately depicts him.
Great, thanks, Gina. I think we need to keep going through the groups.
Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. We have group 4, Frederick Siegel. You think you'd be able to present, just give us a brief overview of what you talked about, and
well, I started with a counter narrative to the film because I didn't find it particularly poignant. It was almost, for me, an awkward collage of Ingmar Bergman and James Bond, and fell into a lot of cookie cutter stereotypes in terms of the young revolutionaries, hotheads versus the seasoned veterans, the Communist Central Party versus the person on the site who was against the general strike because didn't find it particularly effective. So I did offer that counter interpretation or my response to the film, and said that I didn't think if there was someone who I knew who I thought might be interested in something about the Spanish Civil War, a younger person, that this would be on my list of recommended films, because I don't know that it would provide much clarity to anything that was going on, or
Agreed.
Even however, I think the violent versus non-violent approach to resistance is something that is applicable, to today in our country. And so I brought up the fact that ETA was carrying out assassinations of, famously the prime minister, Franco's heir to the fascist seat. there, and that is that something that's effective? Is that part of what ultimately led to fascism not coming back in Spain? Similarly, in the United States, did the assassination of that United Healthcare executive, is that something that raised consciousness and um, created some solidarity on parts of the uninsured and the subject to healthcare abusive masses, or did it result in a reaction against that? So I think a more authoritarian reaction against the violence that provides the excuses for greater repression. So I think that was to be found in the film, but I think it was sort of a hard way to get there by way of these cookie cutter kind of stereotypical characters and dialogue with this kind of existentialist overlay that I found sort of almost a parody. I can see Woody Allen doing a parody of this movie in part. I'll give you a line: opaque reality that we cannot predict and the dream of indefinite progress. These lines are almost, comedic to me. So I didn't find universal agreement with my interpretation, but there was grounds for discussion in the group, particularly in that question of violence versus nonviolence opposition.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dennis, do we have who's next?
Stanley, group 5, Stanley Levine. If you'd like to just present what your group did, you can speak now.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, just as a preamble, I did not find the film to be objectionable the way the last person did. These people represented, real people who reacted to what was happening in these various ways, and they weren't just cartoon figures in my view, and particularly, of course, the main character was definitely not any cookie cutter figure in my view. But what we discussed in the group, we started out talking about the strategies, and the film lays out 3 strategies. The strategy of the general strike, the strategy of bombing the tourist sites, and then someone suggested that there was a 3rd strategy voiced by Yves Montagn's character, that you need patience, that things, Rome wasn't built in a day, sort of, that it's illusory to expect one strike or one bomb to complete a historic task. Then we pass on to a discussion of the women, the 2 very different women, different in age, different in their political points of view, different in the ways they are connected to Spain. And I felt also, I think this was more or less of a consensus, that there was a parallel between the difference in the way they acted and political and so forth, and the difference in the relationship they had with Carlos or Domingo or whatever we want to call them. Some people had experience in Spain in the 60s when this film was made. And there were 2 of us who spoke about that particularly, and we both had witnessed open criticism of Franco. The other person thought that this reflected that the regime was fragile. I don't know if that's the truth, but So on the one hand, somebody in the marketplace who was a veteran on the Republican side who was giving a diatribe. He may have had a little something to drink, but he was expressing this in public in a crowded marketplace, and nobody uh, attacked him with violence. I'm talking about the public. There were no police around, so it wasn't that the Guardia Civil let him speak, but the ordinary public, maybe because he seemed drunk. My experience, I was there as a guest of the family of someone I met who was a member of the anti-Franco resistance at a younger period. He was a professor who was living in exile in France, and I was a guest of his family. And through that connection, I was at a cafe where they had a TV showing Franco's annual State of the Nation talk and openly, jeering and mocking and criticizing him. Again, I was a little surprised at how open their expression was.
What year was this, Stanley?
That was in the probably in about 65.
So contemporaneous to the film.
66. It was, let's see, it was when I was in Paris. So it was 66 to 68. And my friend's wife had been tortured in jail. So that made it even more surprising that people would, one of them had just gotten out of jail, but they were still openly talking with each other about how they felt. But let me go on to other things we talked about. We talked about, was Domingo, someone thought Domingo was his real name, and other people took exception to that and said, we don't really know what his real name is. Well, he says that's his real name, but what does that mean?
No, he has various aliases, as Semprún did over the course of his work in the resistance. I'll just say that thanks for that variety of observations, all of them rich and worth commenting on. The one thing that I don't know if I came across in my introduction is that Semprún was, I think I mentioned it, was incredibly successful at what he did. He, in many ways, is single-handedly responsible for this. This goes to your observations about a certain degree of openness that surprised you. Very successful at pulling young people, particularly in the university and in the arts, cinema sectors, towards him. He was like a magnet. He was handsome. He was suave. He had a good sense of humor. He was sophisticated, and he was motivating. So people were drawn to him as if by a magnet. So he really made a huge difference in the ways in which students and other groups approached the resistance to the regime. So he did really, really important work. It's not, some of these openings are really, we can attribute to Semprún's work. His main alias was Federico Sanchez. Each of his aliases can be traced to a character or a friend. Domingo, in this case, is probably an homage to a very important Spanish bullfighter who was sympathetic to the communist line of resistance, whose own brother was a member of the Communist Party, Dominguín, and whose homes provided cover for Semprún during his comings and goings back and forth into Spain. But I think we are to understand that Diego Mora, Mora, a last name being a variant of Maura, his mother's family's name, is, I think, the original, the given name of our character who functions under various nom de guerre.
Gina, I want to say we've reached our time, but I really want to give you a thank you and a virtual round of applause for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
I know you have a couple of announcements to end with, but we
I
wanted to.
do. I have a couple of announcements. I wish we could talk all day. I'm happy to receive emails from folks if we want to continue the conversation. ALBA relies on donations from people like you, our constituents, our audience. We really we're doing the anti-fascist cultural work. We're doing it. We're in it. There's not that many of us out there, so please, so we can continue to make these contributions to our followers, to be able to bring you these cultural events. Please support us. We have just keep an eye out on your emails for upcoming events. I'll mention two. The next event in our film series is on documentary newsreels, September 29th. Please stay tuned. And then I'm very happy to inform you that our annual Sussman Lecture on October 16th will be delivered by Joyce Horman. Joyce Horman is the surviving partner of Charlie Horman, who was murdered in Chile, and who, speaking of Costa Gavras, is portrayed by Sissy Spacek in the fabulous film Missing. So I do hope that you will perhaps watch Missing again in advance of Joyce Foreman's Sussman Lecture on October 16th. Thank you so much for being here. It's a wonderful thing to be part of the ALBA family, particularly now when we're facing such precarious political times. Thank you to Mark and Dennis.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks, everyone.